Welcome to the Nourished Child podcast, a show about childhood nutrition, feeding kids, and dealing with the ups and downs of growing a healthy child. Here's your host, registered dietitian and childhood nutrition expert, Jill Castle.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Nourished Child podcast. I'm Jill Castle, your host, and today I'm talking about intuitive eating with Sumner Brooks. She is a registered dietitian who specializes in eating disorders. She's also the author of How to Raise an Intuitive Eater. So she is an authority on this topic. I am so delighted to have her here with me today. We are going to be, of course, setting the stage around what intuitive eating is, but then we're going to apply it to real life and help you navigate some of the tricky conversations you might be having online or with friends or even maybe your healthcare provider. So, Sumner, welcome to the show.
Hi, Jill. Thank you very much for having me. It's so nice to be here and chat with you.
It's great to have you on the show. I've known about your book. I've known about you for a long time. We really haven't crisscrossed until we were at today's Dietitian in early May, and our booths happened to be right next to each other. And I think it was sort of a divine intervention, making sure that we could meet each other and connect. And so it was just delightful to connect with you. And I'm glad you're here today to chit chat with us about everything intuitive eating. So
yeah, it was so great. I agree, though. I just loved that we had that opportunity to have a little more time together. And of course, I heard your talk at the conference, and which just sort of sparked all kinds of really positive reactions and thoughts inside of me because everything that I was learning and hearing from you resonated so much, just right, in parallel with How to Raise an Intuitive Eater and the information that's in my book, which was just so wonderful to see.
Yeah. So I want you to, before we get in this conversation, tell us how you got where you are today. Um, Assuming you did your undergraduate education in nutrition, got your RD, but past that, tell us a little bit about you and why you're doing the work you're doing today.
Yeah, great. I'll, just to give a summary and give an idea of how I came to the place where I felt comfortable and confident with writing this book. The way back is that I struggled with disordered eating, for as far back as I can remember, all the way until my mid 20s or so. Actually, when I came across the initial training of intuitive eating with the original pioneers, Evelyn Tribole and Elise Resch. And I really credit intuitive eating, aside from all of my professional work, as being life-changing and really restoring and healing for me, which is so, so, so important. And at the same time, I really have that awareness and try to check my biases around, just because something was my experience doesn't mean it's necessarily what someone else's needs are.
Yeah.
But initially, that is what set me on the path. So, yes, I'm a registered dietitian. I have a master's degree in public health and began stepping into eating disorder counseling really pretty early on in my career. I spent a couple years more focused on wellness and sports nutrition and actually have a background as a sports specialty dietitian. And when I opened my private practice, I really began to see just, a huge percentage of people coming through the door really were struggling with disordered eating and eating disorders. So I sought out supervision and training in the field of eating disorders and really at that point, having had my own experience of finally feeling so healthy and grounded and positive in my own body and with my own relationship with food, that I felt like it really was a calling of mine. This is work that I love to do. I truly feel it is actually life-changing and life-saving work. And I love that piece of it never goes away for me. I just, every single time, whether it's a conversation or a client or working with a parent, it's so meaningful and so important.
Yeah.
And so I think all of that kind of flowed out, right, in the writing.
Yeah.
But eventually, I have 2 kids. So fast forward, I have a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old. And it wasn't till after I became a mom and had, 5, 6 years of that under my belt that I felt, more clarity around the experience of parenting and the struggles that can come along with feeding kids, and really the integration of intuitive eating with raising intuitive eaters.
Mhm.
So the book came out in January 2022. So it's been 3 years already.
Mhm.
So, um, yeah, does that give you an idea
Yeah.
of where we're at?
Yes, and I would like you to mention EDRD Pro as well, and sort of the work you do there. Just I know that there will be some dietitians listening to the show, and so I would love for you to just share what you're doing over there, so that they know of another resource in case they don't know about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for mentioning that. So, Eating Disorder Registered Dietitians and Professionals is EDRD Pro. And I started that. It's an online training platform which offers continuing education specifically for registered dietitians, specifically for training around eating disorders and related topics.
Mhm.
So in 2017, I just felt there really was this big need to expand training and make it more accessible and bring it online for folks so that not everybody had to get on an airplane and get to a conference. And it was just clear that it's a really needed, really needed service. And so we're going on 9 years now, and EDRD Pro offers webinars and a membership and deeper dive courses in a number of different topics. So we've got information for dietitians, for everyone from someone who's just starting out and is curious about eating disorders, all the way to more advanced training for really seasoned professionals.
That's great. Such a great resource, really. Okay, let's shift and talk about intuitive eating and your book, How to Raise an Intuitive Eater. Again, we're on video, so I can show your book. Um, is a wonderful resource, but there may be listeners out there who are maybe a little bit familiar with what intuitive eating is, but I want folks to hear it from somebody who really knows what intuitive eating is. And so, if you could sort of set the stage for us so that when we dive into some of these other questions as we move through this, people will have just a good point of reference and understanding of what intuitive eating is.
Yeah, great. It's so important that we start here, isn't it? So everyone's really on the same page, because this can
Yeah.
be quite confusing. There's a lot of, crisscrossing misinformation and assumptions out there, as there is with everything on social media. So this really is no different. Um, Okay, let's start with where it came from. So, Intuitive Eating is a book that is how many people are first exposed to learning about it. It's an approach to food, really a model of eating that was developed by Evelyn Tribole and Elise Resch in the 90s. So, if you go to find the book now, you'll find it in its fourth edition. And there's also a workbook, and there's a journal, and there's a workbook for teens. And I just feel like that's really important given our conversation today, that people know
Yeah.
that that teen book exists. So, intuitive eating is a collection of 10 different principles. And the principles are really designed as teaching points, as learning pieces of this whole approach to letting go of diet mentality, eating in a way that feels peaceful and nourishing and in line with someone's hunger and fullness. I often describe it as a way of eating of how would we eat if we never had diet culture, diet mentality.
Mhm.
How would we eat if we didn't have food labels? How
Yeah.
would we eat if we didn't feel the pressure every day to change our body or to lose weight?
Mhm.
How would we feed our child if we didn't have rules we thought we were supposed to be following? Um, how do we respond to our children's hunger cues, fullness cues, cries, needs? These are all things that I think for someone to really understand intuitive eating, we need to know that it is much more than just eat when you're hungry and stop when you're 70% full. So if somebody listening has heard that is intuitive eating, um, it's really so much more than that. And even the way I just said that, eat when you're hungry can be interpreted as, quote, only when you're hungry,
Mhm.
and stop when you're, quote, comfortably full. That can imply that if you stop when you're overly full, that you've done something wrong. So that what I just described there is not an accurate way of how we want to view intuitive eating. We want to understand that it's about flexibility, permission to eat, permission to nourish our bodies, permission to eat not just for hunger, but also for emotional needs or social experiences.
Mhm.
And then it also incorporates using our cognitive ability, which is, for example, I have a 5-hour meeting all morning. I'm not hungry maybe at 6 a.m., but I need to eat and nourish my body because by the time it's noon, I will have had no other chance to eat. And so that
Sure.
also is part of intuitive eating, is eating wisely, eating in a way that shows that you care for your body or for your child's body.
Mhm.
So going back to the model of it, there are 10 different principles, and they touch on everything from something called interoceptive awareness, which is how we tune into our bodies and notice our sense of hunger and sense of fullness. They also touch on your relationship with movement and joyful movement and helpful and comfortable exercise, or however you want to refer to it. And also, responding to emotions. It's such a big part of how we eat and why we eat are our emotions. So,
Mhm.
one of the principles is about responding to your emotions with kindness, which might not be something that somebody would naturally assume is in there.
Mhm.
So, kind of to view that from a high level, this is not a linear process. It's not step 1 through 10. It's the opposite of a diet program. You
Mhm.
don't do it right or wrong. It's really an experience.
Mhm. When you think about raising a child to be an intuitive eater, um, when you think of sort of, I oftentimes will say, and I experienced this with my own 4 children, there's just incredible intuition from the get-go, right?
Yeah.
Especially if you happen to be able to nurse your baby, for example. You can really see, you can see hunger, obviously, but I think more importantly, when the baby is done nursing, they pull off and there's no, overfeeding. There's no, it's such a natural thing and it's so intuitive for that infant. How do you explain, raising a child to be an intuitive eater? How do you separate out, what they are born with versus when they might get off track and how to bring them back on track? How do you sort of coach families through that?
Yeah. Well, I think it's important for us to identify kind of what we mean by this. What do we mean by raising an intuitive eater? I have witnessed the assumption, again, that means that a child is going to like all their fruits and vegetables, that they are not going to want, more than one brownie after dinner, that they are going to maintain a certain body size, um, that they are never going to, gain weight or have, quote, too much visible fat on their body. I think these are all things that are really important to say none of that describes intuitive eating. So our goal with raising an intuitive eater is to support a child in having positive experiences with food, in eating in a way that feels good for them and nourishes them for their life. So we don't want to be doing things and raising kids in a way where by the time they're 8 years old, they're more fixated on their appearance and their weight than they are on, I'm hungry because I just, had school and recess. And so I'm going to eat and then I'm going to get back out to my next activity, right? We want to have that. We want to help a child enjoy their food, but support them to live their life. Whereas someone who's not an intuitive eater, in this case of how we're talking about it, is a child is caught up in diet mentality, is over focused on eating for food rules, eating correctly, trying to control their weight and appearance. So that's what we're really working towards avoiding with when we say how to raise an intuitive eater. We are aiming for a child that's having positive experiences, respects their body, and eats in a way that works for them and feels good. So just wanted to kind of preface it with that. And so, okay, take me back to your initial question.
Well, it was around, infants being sort of very the what do you call it? Maybe the gold standard of what
Yeah.
it is to be an intuitive eater.
Yeah.
An infant is
Right,
an
right.
intuitive eater, right?
Yes.
And so what happens along the way, or how do you describe it to your families, and how do you coach them to sort of, if they've gotten off a little bit, like I see feeding, we talked,
Yeah.
I had this presentation and we've talked about this, but I see how parents may interact with their children around feeding, if they have a picky eater, they're pressuring them to eat maybe, or they're using food rewards to get their child to eat those vegetables. And so to me, that's sort of one of the ways families can get off track with really overriding that child's natural direction around food and eating. So I'm curious about, is that something that you see too, or how are you looking at it? Because I think your lens is maybe perhaps um, around prevention of eating disorders and dysfunctional eating, and I look at through the lens the same. I absolutely look at it that way as well, but I also am looking at it, um, from a healthy, well-being, you know,
Yeah.
optimizing health and well-being. So it's I think we're the same, but maybe we have a different angle or a different lens
Well,
in terms of so,
I
but I'm
love
curious.
I love what you just said, because what the way I view that is really just a spectrum.
Mhm,
Where is each individual child at, and what do they need to be best supported to have that healthy relationship with food and body? If it's a child who maybe their temperament is more puts them more at risk for disordered eating, or their genetics, or a certain history of life experiences, these are all things that can play into increasing risk for eating disorders.
mhm,
So in that case, we need to see the whole child. We always need to see the whole child. I would hope that 100% of kids were just right back on that end of the spectrum that you're talking about, which is nourishment and growth and development and enjoyment and skills, skills in the kitchen and social eating. Those things are just as important as preventing eating disorders. And also, a child who is having disordered eating or an eating disorder, we want our goal is moving them right back down along that spectrum of more of the work that you do.
mhm,
So um, so I think the way that I approach this, and the way that um, I've tend to just see in my work with parents is this combination of a child's behavior
mhm.
and the way that the parents are responding to it.
Yes.
So there's the parent experience, which is how they are perhaps judging what they're seeing.
Mhm,
how they are perhaps projecting their own experiences onto what
Mhm.
is happening, how they may be experiencing fear
Mhm.
around food and body from our social climate and the wellness culture.
Mhm.
Um, so we might have a child who perhaps does have a really intuitive, natural, relaxed relationship with food. And sometimes the problem I see is actually the parents' experience of what they're seeing, that they
Mhm.
believe something could be wrong, or they're afraid something's wrong, or they've been given some information that is telling them something's wrong when perhaps maybe something's not really wrong. So
Mhm.
the need for this book and this approach is because we have all been conditioned to think in somewhat disordered ways about food and body. And that's
Mhm.
no individual's fault. We actually live inside of this culture that conditions us to be afraid, think these things, judge bodies, fear food, fear pleasure, all of those things.
Mhm.
So when I'm working with someone, I'm really interested in the beginning to understand, okay, what is happening for the child? And are there medical concerns? Are there, physical concerns? Are there psychological concerns? What can we identify as something that we need to support the child with? And then I'm also really noticing what parts of this might be more about parent education and work so that we can make sure we are promoting this relationship, this feeding relationship that
Mhm.
helps the intuitive eater child.
Yeah. 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 I appreciate that so much because oftentimes I find myself wanting to take the child out of the equation when I'm working with families. Not that I'm taking them out of the care equation, but more of I want to focus in on the parents and really get a sense of um, what that dynamic is, right? And oftentimes it goes way back to their own childhood and what's going on or what they're carrying forward with their parenting. And I'm curious, you know, so you said intuitive eating came out in the 90s. What was going on before the 90s? What do you think was
Well,
happening?
I think that this diet culture and the thin ideal, came about a few hundred years ago. If anybody is so curious to learn more, there's a wonderful book called Fearing the Black Body by Dr. Sabrina Strings. And it actually really depicts and shows you the history of where this thin ideal came from. And it's fascinating. So, side note,
Side
read
note.
that to truly understand. You're absolutely right, Jill. This isn't something that popped up in the 90s, right?
Yeah.
Generations and generations have been struggling with body ideals and restriction. Um, and is ebbed and flowed, of course. But what I think from what I've read and learned is there has always been, a hierarchy of bodies and
Mhm.
which body is the right one at what time. And in our current culture, what I notice is a lot of comparison, um, and a lot of competition,
Mhm.
within, the way many people experience, my child needs to be the best at school and the best at sports. And to do that, they have to look this way and they have to eat this way and they have to perform this way. And that is how I am going to make sure as a parent, I'm doing everything I can to give my child a good future. So, like,
Mhm.
and I don't think a lot of parents really understand that that's the way we're being conditioned to raise kids. And
Yeah.
not everybody, of course, is experiencing that, but I think it's pretty common.
I do too. I do too. Um, Healthy lifestyle. If you're on Instagram and or on Facebook, if, you just cannot even go on there now without getting bombarded with um, a variety of messages. But, when we're talking about specific eating patterns for children that have no medical basis, gluten-free, um, or we're talking about eating clean. I want my child to, eat clean. I don't want any quote unquote junk food, ultra processed foods. And that language right now, at this moment in time, folks, we are early June. Those messages are really strong right now, given our government and what's going on with public policy and public health. These messages really do create an uphill battle for parents who, might not even be trying to raise an intuitive eater. They're just trying to feed their child healthy food and prevent illness. Let's say that. What do you see as sort of like what these parents are up against and what they might have to really consider doing in order to put their child first instead of all this messaging that's telling them what to do and what to focus on?
Yeah. And even as I listen to you describe that, I start getting anxious and nervous. As a parent, I can see a segment, on a TV show or anything, right? And I'm just as vulnerable as other people are to thinking, oh my gosh, I have to implement this new idea, or I have to cut this food out because now I know that this is really risky for my child. Like it's just innate in parents that you want to protect your kids. So coming back to what you just said is it's very confusing. And parents are trying to hold so many things together right now that the last thing we need to be doing for parents' mental health, for kids' mental health, and for everyone's physical health, the last thing we need to be doing is creating more fear and stress and anxiety. We
Yeah.
know that stress and anxiety are at the root of chronic diseases and mental health conditions. So we need to consider how someone's intensity and rigidity around food is actually going to have a true impact on a child. As an adult, I can be more of a critical thinker. I can be in charge of my own groceries and my meal choices and what I'm going to pack for lunch, perhaps. But as a child, you have no control. You don't do the grocery shopping. You can't choose what school lunch is provided. You don't know how to interpret why one child's mom buys X, Y, and Z food and why your own parent buys none of those foods. And you don't know how to make sense of that. So it's not for me about so much about the specific foods and educating people on public health. I think there's enough nutrition information around that if people really want to get some basic nutrition information, we can find ways to get that to people. But this piece of the really complex diet rules that are always changing, the ultra processed foods, anxiety, I don't see that any of this is helping people. There's a very, very small sliver of folks who can put that much time and attention and energy into feeding their family in one very specific way every day.
Yeah.
And all the other families are just going to become anxious and afraid. And children feel that, they interpret that, and then they also become confused about food.
Yeah.
And they grow up to think, I need to be afraid of certain things. What I eat every single day is going to, make me healthy or it's going to make me sick, right? This like real strong binary with food.
Yeah. And part of that is just children's cognitive development can't nuance these
Right.
topics at all. Um, Food rules. So, for the listener out there, what, what are they? What are food rules? And can you give some examples? And how are those, impacting the ability to be intuitive with eating?
Mm-hmm. Well, food rules can look so different from family to family. But some examples would be, like you can have one packaged food a day, or you can choose one piece of candy out of this bowl after dinner every night, and that's it for sugar. It could be, you are never allowed to have a soda, ever, or once a year maybe, or something. But to me, that's a rule. I'm not saying that there's one right way to give your children access to soda. I think that's really up to the parent and up to that individual. But things that are very rigid and inflexible and create this sense of fear. So those are things that I think about with food rules. So it can be something about the specific food, or it can be about how a food is eaten, or when a food is eaten,
Mm-hmm.
or where a food is eaten. And I'm thinking right now that in our house, different for everyone, we have a rule of there's no food upstairs in the playroom.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something that I can explain to my kids. They're old enough now, 7 and 10. I can tell them why the rule exists. I can tell them what the consequence is if the rule is broken. But what I am sure of as a parent is that that is not centered around diet culture. It's
Mm-hmm.
not a rule that has to do with a food is bad or scary. I'm not instilling fear in a food, and it's not about weight and body changes. It's about a rule that we've decided to have in our house. So I want to be, clear that people understand you get to make the rules. Parents need to make rules. We have to have boundaries and structure. Our children are not in charge of that. But when we are instilling or following rules that are rooted in diet culture or fear of fatness or fear of weight gain, then we've got to know those are the kind of food rules that can be really problematic, because kids pick up on that, and then that becomes the focus for them, right? Is
Right.
body control, weight control.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that connection can be subtle, right? Um, I'm thinking, oh, there might be parents who are listening to the show and they might be thinking, well, how do I make sure my child doesn't just eat candy all day? How do I make sure, um, you know, that the balance of what they eat is uh, in a good place? I won't be specific with what
Yeah.
the balance looks like, but that the balance is in a good place. How do you answer that? Because I do see that as kind of a pushback. I don't know if you experience that as a pushback, but I can see even some of the parents that I have worked with over the years would be like, "Well, what are you saying? They can just eat what they want whenever they want." I understand.
Yeah.
I understand the line, but I want you to sort of um, walk through that with
Yeah.
the listener.
Yes. So the section of our book that's probably going to be helpful for this, for people, is really around over control. So we have research around what happens when the caregiver or the feeder implements over control of food, which is I'm going to decide how much you're hungry for. In fact, I'm going to decide everything about what you can have. That doesn't allow a child to develop their own skills for, or not even develop, they're born with them. They're born with the skills and the sensations and the brain chemistry and the nervous system and all of this inside our complex bodies. We're designed to be able to know how to self-regulate, is what we refer to it as self-regulation. So we're born with that, and then it can go away when there's over control. And that's really the problem. So we talk about in the book the importance of structure and routine. So
Mhm.
that is, you can think about that as setting up, we call it a flexible feeding routine, where the aim is to get enough food available at fairly appropriate, windows of time, a nice variety of food when possible, and that when we're providing this structure, we're enabling kids to be able to then use those innate skills about how much of that, what do I like, what do I not like, and also giving them an opportunity, right? When you mentioned the candy, we need to help them trust that they do know when they need to stop having the candy without us telling them. Otherwise, we're going to get a 13-year-old who doesn't know how to do that at a sleepover and is going to have some real problems when they are exposed to foods that they can eat freely. So I like to help parents know that this is about a big picture. It's not about a day to day. And if we do have a circumstance where there's been some over control or some restriction or deprivation, there is going to be a period of time in this healing where there's going to be some experiences probably of overeating or eating past the point of fullness or eating in a way that really makes a parent feel very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because the child is getting back to having those experiences that help them get back in touch with self-regulation. And at the same time, there's similar situations where maybe a child doesn't exhibit, behaviors at all that are very concerning to a parent, but the parent's worried they will. Well, what if I actually allowed them? What if I put the plate of cookies out and didn't tell them when they had to stop? I actually love giving parents this homework. So you're telling me you haven't ever really seen what happens when there's a plate of cookies out and you don't take, control of that situation. And I love to have them watch and learn. And sometimes it's he had one and then he took a bite of another and then he walked away.
Yeah.
Or sometimes it's, yes, she kept having more and having more and having more. And then I might say, did she ever eat to a point where it was bothersome or she didn't feel good or, something really negative happened? You might say no. And I might say, what might that be a sign of? Maybe that was the right amount for her at that time based on everything else she's been doing and eating that day.
Yeah.
Because every day is different. Or they might say, yes, she ate to a point where she was really uncomfortable and felt sick. And then we might reflect on that and say, I wonder what that means when she's given this opportunity to have as many as she wants. And could she possibly be compensating for some of the experiences of not having permission to eat these foods? So there's always something to learn. And I know that a lot of times I get questions and parents want one answer, right? If I do A, is B going to happen? Are you going to tell me that B is going to happen? And we just can't do that, right? Because this is so complex.
And sometimes it is just an experiment, like you said. And for listeners out there, as Sumner just described, I do the same thing. Let's see what happens. It's an experiment. Let's see what happens. And oftentimes it's just as you describe. It's almost never, oh, they ate the entire plate of cookies. It's they had one, maybe had the second one, they got up and left the table and went to play in the backyard. And so there is this anxiety from parents around following the social rules of how much to eat.
Yeah.
Right. And so it is so important to understand that we live within sort of these confines of what is expected of us as a parent. And every parent out there wants to be a good parent. They want to raise a healthy kid. They want to raise a healthy eater. They want to raise a child who's an intuitive eater. What do you see maybe myths or pushback around intuitive eating or misuse of the concept? What do you see
Yeah.
happening out there around that topic?
Yeah. Well, I see a lot of people kind of very directly pushing back against body positivity or body diversity. So, acceptance that children live in different size bodies and we're all genetically unique. And no matter, you could feed 10 different kids the exact same thing every single day, and you're still going to have 10 different bodies.
Mm-hmm.
But what I see is that is really troubling for some people. There is a belief system out there that weight can be controlled, that weight is a controllable thing. And we know that it isn't. We have so much science and research around weight science now that we know it's no longer calories in, calories out, and body size and weight is not controllable.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I see that there's this connection, of course, between weight acceptance or size acceptance and body diversity and intuitive eating, right? Because we're saying no to diet culture and we're saying yes to size diversity and body positivity. And so the folks who are pushing back against that are not only creating a lot of fear around body size and BMI, but they also don't want people to believe that you can have permission to eat and you can trust your body. And what's so interesting about that is I have to be careful because of course I don't know for certain, right? But my sense is that the people who um, push back against intuitive eating don't experience intuitive eating. They don't themselves live in a way where they say, yeah, I have this innate ability and I can enjoy food without binging on it. And I can eat differently every day. And sometimes that means I have two pieces of pie at the same time or something, but that's okay because I don't really want to do that the next 5 meals in a row. They don't feel it. So they're
Yeah.
not intuitive eaters, and therefore they don't believe that you can be an intuitive eater and be healthy, which is
Mm-hmm.
really sad.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that exists a lot. I think that there's a lot of that happening in the wellness industry.
I think so too. So that begs the question, what if you have a parent who is not an intuitive eater and they
Yeah.
want to raise an intuitive eater?
Yeah.
that's
I
the that's the question of the day. Let's solve
well,
this.
I have been in this room in that situation so many times. And
Mhm.
it's almost like you don't even need to talk about it in the moment because it's so heavy and it's so hard. And the parent themselves they hear themselves. This is very confronting to be in that situation where you're seeking out help for your child. And then what happens is you start to peel back some of the layers and you realize there's some work to be done on your end. And that is scary. And people can feel a lot of shame around that or guilt. There's all kinds of things that pop up when a parent realizes, oh, the very thing I want for my child is something that I haven't even figured out myself. And that can be overwhelming. So you said, so what do you do when you're in that situation? I try to be very, very gentle.
Mhm.
I feel so much empathy for that parent who has taken their time and energy to say, hey, I love my kids so much. I really want to help them avoid, disordered eating.
Mhm.
Um, it's amazing. I don't ever want a parent to walk away from a conversation with me who has reached out for help to walk away feeling bad.
Yeah.
So I approach that with, let's get curious. Talk to me about what you're worried about.
Mhm.
Tell me about what's happening and what you're witnessing. Let's let's learn more about some of the history here with your child. This is a unique individual, and I can't possibly, tell you right or wrong or what to do without understanding the picture of this whole person. But what do I want to say inside sometimes is like, look, you got to get out of diet culture.
Mhm.
You got to get rid of the scale.
Mhm.
The pressure and the intensity of how you're approaching food at home is going to push your child farther and farther away from their natural peaceful relationship with food.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but it's a very important question, and it is what we are seeing and dealing with. So a whole portion of our book, a third of the book, is dedicated to the parent looking into their own relationship and history with food for this very reason. You can't
Yeah.
separate the two.
You can't. You can't. And as I mentioned earlier in the show, a lot of this comes from their own childhood. It might be coming from the social pressures of today. They're adults who are in the world and experiencing that, but a lot of this gets seeded in childhood.
Mhm.
Um, and we talked, my co-author and I, for Fearless Feeding, we talked about the parent trap. We have a whole chapter on, how you were fed and how you were handled as a child around food and eating colors every move you make with your own children. You just can't get around it. You have to actually, once you see it, you can't stop seeing it.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it is very, very interesting. Well, so I mean, I feel like we could talk. I can't believe
I know.
we're already 45 minutes into this. I'm like, wait, where's the time gone? Um, what can parents do today, over the next years? They're raising children. What can they actually do
Mhm.
to get started? Besides grab your book, but to
Mhm.
get started on the path or on the journey of raising an intuitive eater.
Yeah. Well, I want to give you 25 different places to start because I feel like, they're all so important. I put myself in a position of a parent who wants to begin making some changes. And the first thing I would tell them is simply the fact of them being aware and wanting to reduce harm and wanting to make some changes for the better is a wonderful first step. You're farther along than you were, however long ago. Like some light bulbs are going off. You're understanding that there could be some problems here. Okay, so what are the next steps? Well, there's a lot of learning to do, truly, because we're in this really intense world where we're getting food and nutrition and diet rules thrown at us everywhere we look. We have to start thinking critically about what we're believing and how we're being sold and marketed all of this information.
Mhm.
Diet culture is about money, right? People making money. So I encourage people to go inward. Okay. So if you're not being sold something, what matters today? Well, it matters that I get my kid food regularly. Maybe it matters to me that we have positive feelings when we're eating together or positive feelings at the dinner table. Um, let's just start there. And the reason why that's so important is because when you're over controlling your child's eating, or when you're implementing rigid food rules, or when they're complaining because they can't have something that is in front of them, but they've already had one, right? It's not a happy feeling. We're not having positive feeding experiences. So I would encourage a parent to start thinking critically about the information they're believing or taking in. Begin your learning journey about intuitive eating and diet culture, and really focus on positivity with food. Don't say negative things about food, find out the positive thing. Um, like I write in the book in a place about elephant ears. So you're at a
Mhm.
zoo and the child says, I want an elephant ear. And it's not, well, if you're good, if you behave well, we can get an elephant ear. The comment that might be really positive is, oh my gosh, those are so good, aren't they? Well, maybe we can have one later with our snack. And that's it. You can keep it neutral and positive. But that's what's missing, I think. And so that's a place to start.
Yeah, great direction. Sumner, where can people find you, find your book? Where can they reach out and connect with you?
Yeah, on Instagram, which I'm not really on too much anymore. Haven't found time for it, but I'd love to get back there. But Intuitive Eating RD. And then for professionals, you can learn more about EDRD Pro at edrdpro.com. And the book is available everywhere books are sold.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your wisdom and all your talents with my audience. I appreciate it.
This was great. Thank you, Jill.
Thanks for listening to the Nourished Child podcast, where the #1 goal is to help you grow a nourished child inside and out.